Good afternoon. Welcome to everyone who's joined us today to listen to what will be a thoroughly interesting session where two of the board directors of the Chamber, one ex-advisory board now and one board director, will be taking us through the book and the understanding of the story. Before we get to that, just to introduce myself, I am Sharon Constanson. I am chairman of the South African Chamber of Commerce. And you're not going to be listening to me. I'm going to be here just for a few seconds before I hand over to the rest of the team. The Chamber's been getting on with a lot of very interesting sessions, ranging from business to trading to social to charity. And believe it or not, we even got together for drinks the other day for the first time in 20 months. So it's been very, very exciting times for the Chamber as things are moving into a more hybrid environment. And we do retain the webinar series because that is the one way of getting to speak to some of the people we would not otherwise be able to reach and be able to reach an audience as broadly as we have got with us today. I have placed in the chat function the link to the book, which is available on Amazon. So please use the link if that is what you want to do. And I think by the end of today, you probably will. I already have my copy too. And thank you very much for being with us today. I really appreciate it. I just want to introduce Peter Attard Montalto, who is a board director of the South African Chamber. He is also working for the research company Intellidex. He has an extensive profile as a commentator and thought leader, puts me into the shadows on certain topics like I can't believe. I really feel quite inferior quite easily. But Peter is very, very knowledgeable on things of government activity in South Africa. And then I'd like to please introduce John Battersby, a long-term friend as well, who's now on the advisory board and one of the founder members of the Chamber originally. John will be starting with us. He comes from a journalistic background and has the pride of place to be the first person to shake Mandela's hand when he came out of prison. So well done, John, who stayed in the literary journalistic world for a long time, even though he's been with Brand South Africa and the Chamber and many other charities that he has chaired as well. So John, I'd like to hand over to you to start the session today. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Sharon, and welcome to Chris Whitfield and Jonathan Ancer, the authors of this really interesting book. I think we're going to start off with Chris. You're going to read an excerpt from the book.
I'm going to read from chapter 5, which is called Captured by the State. By Durban standards, it was a cold day on 12 July 1990 when Pravin Gordhan pulled up outside a block of flats in Whitfield Road in the suburb of Overport. He was there to meet Amnesh Sankar, who, with Gordhan, had been chosen to be part of Operation Vula. The Whitfield Road flat was being used both as a residence for a colleague who'd entered the country for the operation and as an administration center. Gordhan, in short sleeves in spite of the weather, parked his car in the basement and walked up the 2 flights of stairs to the flat. He put the key in the lock and opened the door. The next thing, he was looking down the barrel of a handgun. Pointing it at Gordhan's head was an officer from the notorious security branch in Durban. Operation Vula had been exposed. There was, of course, intense secrecy around Operation Vula in 1988, when Mac Maharaj and Sifuwe Nyanda were sent into the country on a clandestine mission by the ANC's leadership in exile. Gordhan himself had been scheduled to pick up Maharaj from the Swaziland border, but there'd been a communication mix-up and Gordhan had gone to the Zimbabwean border. Maharaj got a taxi to Johannesburg and was driven from there to Durban by Ismail Mamoniat. There was a knock on my house door, which very few people knew about, and lo and behold, it was Mac, says Gordhan. Many of those involved still point to Maharaj when asked to elaborate on the aims of the operation, saying he held his cards close to his chest and drip-fed information only when absolutely necessary. Underground operatives at the time worked on a strict need-to-know basis. This didn't always go down well with his comrades. Billy Nair was a venerated struggle activist with many years of experience who'd been imprisoned for 20 years on Robben Island. He was one of the first people Maharaj looked up after sneaking into the country via Swaziland. The first night I was alone with Billy, he suggested we take a drive at about 11 at night, and we drove down to the Durban beachfront, Maharaj recalls. And he drove me past CR SWAT, the police station where the security branch officers in Durban were located. And the lights were on the 11th floor. And Billy said, "Now you see, that's the floor where we get tortured. Now it's time we bombed this fucking place." And I said to him, "We're not doing it." So we went back to my hideout. We had a moorse argument. I couldn't disclose, even to Billy, the nature of my mission. He thought I was there to carry out MK activity, and he was getting furious that I wasn't agreeing. As he and Maharaj sipped on whiskey, Nair asked, "What are you doing here if you can't take orders from us?" "Who the hell are you guys to give me orders?" responded Maharaj. "Well, we are the UDF, said Nair. "Well, you fuck off. You don't give me orders," Maharaj shouted. Nair had come to Maharaj's hideout with a cap pulled low over his face and a walking stick. He put on his cap, grabbed the stick, and stormed out, swearing black and blue, says Maharaj. And Yonder, who by that time had joined them in the safe house, was, according to Maharaj, shocked at the ferocity of the argument between two senior comrades. Maharaj was due to leave for Johannesburg the next day at 5 a.m., but decided that he should first set things straight with Nair. I wrote a note apologizing to Billy. "Put aside this argument. We're in one struggle, blah, blah, blah." Maharaj went to Nyanda's bedroom with the note in a sealed envelope and asked him to give it to Nair, who, at 7 the next morning, was knocking on the door of the safe house, despite not being supposed to visit during daylight hours. Safiwe gets up, opens the door. Billy doesn't even greet Safiwe. He marches to my bedroom, and he finds my bed made and I'm gone. "Where's this guy? Why is he gone?" Nair asked. "You know, he was heading for Joburg. He left at 5, responded Nyanda. "Oh shit," said Nair. "I've come to say sorry. He left an envelope here for you." Maharaj finishes the story laughing. He, Nair, opens the envelope. He reads it where I'm saying sorry. He says, "I withdraw my sorry, as long as it's clear that he apologized first."
Thanks, Chris. Well, that's a very dramatic and vivid insight into a major showdown between two very senior struggle people, and at a very dramatic time, given the drama that unfolded around the Operation Vula and the arrests that were subsequently made. It's an extraordinary book in that it really does humanize Pravin Gordhan, who at times seemed to be literally carrying the resistance to the Zuma era and the Zuma axis virtually alone on his shoulders. And one is intrigued by how what different paths different members of the ANC went down, obviously having started with the same objectives. And Pravin Gordhan clearly was an activist. I think what took my attention particularly was the theme of the higher purpose, which comes through very strongly right throughout the book. Could you talk a bit about that and how that came across to you? That what kept Pravin Gordhan, this born activist who's been pharmacist, finance minister, detainee, communist, what kept him on such a focused and clear path, always wanting to do the right thing?
Chris, should I start? And
Yeah. Go for it. Yeah.
Okay. So, yeah. I think that really is at the heart of this book. Is that higher purpose? Is trying to understand what motivated him to do the things that he did. And I think we try to trace his political consciousness where it started, and we got to university, which is when he grew up in this kind of humble environment. His parents were immigrants to South Africa. His father opened a sari store. selling saris. It was when he was at university to develop a business as something, in South Africa needed to be fought. And he and a couple of students got together, and they started to, I think there were 5 of them, they started reading, they started to explore philosophy, and they started to develop a philosophy of resistance and of higher purpose, which was about doing things for not only for themselves, but for the broader community. And it all came to a head, I think, in 1976, when they were busy discussing, well, what is it that they can achieve? How can they best work and best achieve the results?
Thanks, thanks, Jonathan. Yeah, that's really interesting how he came to that. And then what was it that enabled him to sustain this incredible pressure? I mean, when he was under attack from all sides later on during the Ramaphosa presidency, what were the qualities that formed? He seemed to me to be very inclusive, and he seemed to be an amazing organizer and an ability to inspire others around him to be part of what he was doing. He never did things alone. He did things as part of a team, and he built a very strong team. Did that come across clearly in your reporting and research on the book?
Yeah, those very qualities, John, he was astonishingly, I mean, everybody we talked to said he was a great strategist, great organizer, and he had, those are obviously very special qualities. But I think what kept him going in those very tough times is an absolute commitment, and probably a purer commitment to this country than I've come across in any politician. He's absolutely driven. He calls himself an activist. He doesn't like being called a politician, and nothing will take him off that path. Jonathan and I have got a little bit tired now being called veteran journalists when people introduce us at sessions like this. And as such, having been around the block a few times, we're not particularly starry-eyed. But this guy really impressed us. He is very special. And that commitment, I think he draws it from his own personal strength, a purity of what he wants to achieve. And also he's got a lot of support around him, his family and his comrades. They are very supportive.
You both interviewed a very wide range of people who know Pravin Gordhan, and it seems as though there's tremendous admiration for him amongst his obviously his circle and his colleagues, but then he also became the bête noire of the Zuma faction. So people either loved him or hated him. Did you manage to speak to some of the people who sort of targeted him?
I hope you can hear me. I think my
can hear you now,
Jonathan.
Yeah.
Okay,
you're
good.
clear now.
So again, thanks. So we actually did put out a call to. We made a list of all his foes. The current public protector, the EFF, Iqbal Survey, anybody who's sort of come out against him. And we explained that we were writing this book, and that we wanted to interview them about the substance of their allegations. And not one of those people responded to us. So we didn't end up speaking to them directly, although a lot of them had gone public with their claims, especially around and we interrogated that SARS rogue unit fiction. And we came to our own conclusions about why he's collected all these enemies in his political life.
It's quite remarkable that none of them would speak to you. What did that say to you? It would seem to indicate that that they didn't actually have a lot to say. They didn't have very much rational to say about it.
Well, it said a lot about the substance of the allegations if they weren't prepared to justify them. Yeah.
There's a chapter in, sorry, John, there's a chapter in the book called Smoke Without Fire where we try and interrogate the allegations about him and where they come from. And that ultimately is the conclusion that we reached, that there's smoke without fire in this case.
Yeah, well, there was a lot of smoke and a lot of fire, and he managed to maintain his cool throughout. One of the things, I guess, one of the questions I had in my head when you deal, the section where you deal with whether he, how much he knew, whether he should have known more about what was going wrong under the Zuma period, and having been obviously a close colleague of Zuma's in the earlier years. Do you think that he was credible in terms of the time when he went public on what was wrong? Could he have done that earlier, and could he have come to that conclusion earlier?
Yeah, I think he was in a very difficult position because around about the time of that notorious nuclear deal, that's about when there was a particular meeting on that, and that's where he realized that there's a serious problem here. And then he had to make a calculation, and he didn't really want to talk to us about this, but other people did, including his wife, about whether it would be more effective fighting from inside the ANC or just leaving the party and going out. And he and others, I believe he and others like Cyril Ramaphosa chatted about it, and they felt generally that it would be more effective to stay inside and try and redirect the party from internally. And yes, could he have talked earlier? I think if you look at the timeline, as far as I understand it, he was quite outspoken quite quickly. He's not a guy, I mean, a lot of his former cabinet colleagues told us that he's not a guy who's afraid to criticize them or anybody for that matter. When he gets up to say something, he will say what's on his mind. So, and I don't think he kind of hung on to it too long.
And when he made that decision or when he decided that things had gone horribly wrong, he certainly lost no time, and it must have been a massive break for him to completely turn his back on Jacob Zuma, having been such close comrades in the struggle. Did that come across to you?
I think it came across quite strongly. Also, just to go back to that previous point, is that when Zuma came to power in 2009, and that was when he appointed Pravin into the cabinet. But it was also at a time when there were people who were very relieved that Thabo Mbeki was out of favor and had left the political scene, left the presidency, because there had been issues with his presidency. And so Jacob Zuma, to a lot of people within the ANC, was seen as somebody who's charming, who's got charisma, and wasn't going to be, whatever his views on HIV were, he wasn't going to be a stumbling block for the rollout of the ARV treatment. So to many people, Jacob Zuma was seen as a positive step. But as you say, when he realized that when Pravin realized that things were going south, he wasted no time. And we spoke to somebody who was quite, who was played a central role at that time, and he says that the country owes Pravin a debt of gratitude, because if it hadn't been for him, we might be sitting with this $1 trillion, dollar or rand nuclear deal. So it's thanks to Pravin that he put steps in place to make sure that these things didn't happen.
Yes, well, that was an extraordinary moment. And one last question, perhaps, before I hand over to Peter. If we go back to 9th of December 2015, when Zuma appointed Des van Rooyen out of the blue as the finance minister, and then the group within the ANC got together and managed to turn Zuma around. But it must have been an absolutely extraordinary moment for Pravin Gordhan, having been demoted by Zuma, to then be invited to be the finance minister again. I can't think of any precedent in any government anywhere where a president who's demoted one of his ministers is then forced to rehire him. He must have been completely shocked when he was asked to be the finance minister again.
I think he was, and we spoke quite a bit to him about that moment. It was clear that that was, I think, a big turning point in the political life of Jacob Zuma, because it was at that point where everybody just stood up to him, not only sort of the opposition, but senior people in the ANC. And it was because of people like Ramaphosa and even the rest of the top 6 of the ANC that they went to Zuma and they said, you can't do this. This has to change. And and they identified Pravin, who had been demoted, and he got a call from Jesse Duarte, Pravin did, within moments, saying Zuma's going to call you. Then he got a call from Ramaphosa saying Zuma's going to call you. You better say yes. And then 3 minutes later, Zuma called him and told him to come and meet him. And it was at that meeting that he told him, he said, I don't want to get rid of Des van Rooyen, but the markets have completely imploded, the bottom's fallen out, and we need you to come back. And Pravin didn't want to come back. He really didn't. And he phoned his wife, and they had a conversation, and he decided that he would. But it was from that moment that it was really war between the Zuma sort of declared war on Pravin.
That's right. From that moment, Zuma was forced to become more and more crude and less and less Machiavellian, if I might put it that way, and then ended up, of course, firing Pravin Gordhan again. Right, Peter, are you there, ready to take up the next part?
Cool, thank you very much, John. So, following on from that issue somewhat, and that sense of public service, if we rewind back and we think about when Pravin was appointed to SARS, you detail in the book how it wasn't necessarily an obvious choice. There were some question marks inside Treasury, perhaps over the choice. When he moved from SARS to Treasury, it also wasn't, for the first time, it wasn't a particularly obvious choice necessarily. But if we think back, and I think what you detail in the book and people often forget, is he had quite a long career in Parliament already as a backbencher. And I suppose the central question is, when does he turn from being an activist, or he's always been an activist, but when does he turn from being an activist really to be a policymaker, to being someone who can build an institution like at SARS? Are there hints from his background, or do you think that really was very much bringing some of his raw smarts and learning on the job?
I think that is the answer, Peter. I think from his early days as an activist, he had a extraordinary ability to organize and to wrap his head around very complex issues and problems and come up with solutions. A lot of people have said to us when we were researching the book that he approached the SARS job as an activist. And so all those qualities that he'd learned from all the years of mass mobilization, for example, the mass mobilization aspect of his history required massive diligence and an eye for detail. And I think that's just a quality that he had all along. When he was chairing the negotiations leading up to the settlement in South Africa, Rolf Meyer was his opposite from the National Party. And he says when he heard that Pravin was a pharmacist, he was astonished because he thought he was dealing with a very accomplished lawyer. And I think that's the qualities that that are inherent in the person.
And in the sort of second half of the book, you start detailing a lot about, you know, the events that happened, the pushback, the smear campaigns, etc., in a lot of detail, and deconstruct them as well. But if we think about his time, you know, at SARS, I mean, it doesn't feel like still. I mean, it still feels like the public narrative or the conclusion of where this came to is still somewhat messy. So you've looked into those years quite a lot, the rogue unit, things like that. What are your broad takeaways of the simple facts of what went on or didn't go on?
Well, I think he rubbed you know, a lot of people up the wrong way. His activism against corruption alienated a lot of people in the faction of the ANC that were aligned to Zuma and who are corrupt. The EFF, which has its own corruption issues. People in for example, in the media who aren't particularly clean. So he rubbed a lot of people up the wrong way, and they started coming at him in a major and quite concerted way. I think it's just that. I think it's really just that he was seen as the public face of the resistance to what these people were doing.
But during his years at SARS, I mean, he survived for 10 years in the role, managed to transition to be Minister of Finance. He must have had enough buy-in from Zuma to make that leap. They were obviously, as you detail in the book, historic struggle colleagues. So the balance of sort of going after corruption at that point, whilst at SARS, he built out, of course, the big sort of investigative units inside SARS as well. Still allowed him to make that transition. And in that sense, did Zuma make a mistake in sort of appointing him first time around?
Well, I think Zuma did make a mistake for Zuma, but not for the country. We did look at his role as finance minister. He was really an effective commissioner at SARS. He turned SARS from, I think it was floundering when he took over, into this world-class institution. And I think for me that I didn't know very much about what he had done at SARS, the sort of the gritty details, but it was an incredible achievement, and that was his commitment to the higher purpose, where he and that was also kind of his role as an activist, that people were doing the right thing, and he got people to do the right thing, and he showed incredible organization. He was able to turn this huge institution and streamline it. And I think that was possibly the reason that he was chosen by Zuma. They were comrades in the 70s, but they weren't that close. And so we did try and kind of pick out why him. And we asked Pravin, why did Zuma choose you? And he seemed to suggest, he didn't say it in so many words, but he said, well, maybe Zuma thought he could manipulate him. Well, he couldn't.
Why would Zuma think he could do that necessarily?
I think because of their association, because maybe this was somebody who had been ignored by Mbeki for a cabinet position, and maybe would owe some allegiance to Zuma. I'm not sure. I'm just surmising here. I don't know, but it was something that Pravin had told us that he thought about quite a lot. Why did Zuma choose him?
I remember at the time, there were lists of potential finance ministers. He was on that list always, but it was never entirely obvious. So it's an interesting question still to mull on, certainly. But when we think about his two periods as finance minister from 2009 to 2014, obviously a very busy period with the global financial crisis, very challenging technical issues inside Treasury around how to manage recovery and consolidation and fiscal policy. His then second period, slightly easier in macro terms from 2015 to 2017. He does appear, and I think to markets, to people and investors who dealt with him at the time, to have been somewhat different between the two phases. Now, obviously, there was state capture, but even in his underlying views and stance, maybe he was a little different. And he's often, and particularly in his first term, was viewed in very simplistic terms, right, as a creature of the left. People just bandy around the term communist, etc. And I think certainly now we don't apply those labels. But was that ever true, or was he always a pragmatist? He just happened to sort of come at things via the left.
Yeah, I think he. I mean, his foundation, his political foundation, was steeped in kind of the leftist world, and those were the principles that he believed in. But a couple of people who we interviewed for the book said that he is at heart a pragmatist. So, for example, he will take on a portfolio like he has now with the Department of Trade and Industry, and his first approach will be, to apply the kind of principles. He'll attempt to apply the principles that he's believed in through his career. But ultimately, he's a pragmatist, and ultimately he will come up with a solution that, for example, with SAA, hopefully a long-term solution to the issues like that.
Indeed, and you actually detail in the book in one section how he's sort of has grabbed onto maybe Mariana Mazzucato as someone, who is trying to reimagine some of these leftist notional sort of issues, like the capacity of the state to drive growth and innovation, to push that forward into sort of a new era in South Africa. She's obviously on the Presidential Economic Advisory Committee. We've seen that in SAA as well. But in all of this, he and in DPE now, but in the past as well, he's had relatively small groups of advisors around him, right? And what does that come from? Is it just the people he gets on with, the trust issue? What do you think sort of drives the way he works as a minister in that sense?
I think he is trust is a fundamental requirement for him and people that work with him. We did interview people who were very close to him, for example, in the department now, and a lot of them use that word, trust, and they said it is fundamental to him. He's quite practical in that if someone adds value and he doesn't know them terribly well, he will bring them to the table. But the people who he trusts are the people that he will go and sit in a small room with. And it is a small bunch of people. And a lot of them have followed him throughout his career.
Yeah. He's also, that what came up time and time again is that, words like, taskmaster and works people hard. And I think he doesn't suffer fools. You have to prepare, you have to do your homework, you have to know what you're talking about. And I think if you don't, and you will not have an easy time with him. I think, that's part of how he operates, is he drills down into those details. And I think he is very strategic. He can see, it's his strength, he told us, that he can drill into the details and see the bigger picture. And I think that is something that very few people can do.
By the way, sorry, I was just going to say, by the way, when he said that, I mean, he's not given to bragging. This is one of the only two things that he claimed as achievements in his life. And whereas if you read the book, you will see there's extraordinary things that he has done.
Exactly. I was going to touch on that, actually, in the sense of in maybe other countries, these qualities maybe aren't, dramatic, of being strategic, etc., aren't dramatically, abnormal. But in South Africa, he is this quite unique in the political economy combination of the technical, the detail orientation you go into a lot in the book, the policy strategy, the political strategy, and one maybe wonders why he hasn't maybe had ambitions for higher office with that kind of strategy, etc. Do you think he's happy in this very, very important set of jobs, but that are sort of one step back from the top?
Yeah, I would think so. I mean, there's a racial dynamic in South Africa that we can't ignore. And he comes from a population group that's never going to make the presidency. But I think he's very happy to serve. I mean, ultimately, as I said earlier, he sees himself as an activist and he's serving the people of the country. I don't think he had ambitions ever for higher office.
Interesting. We saw the strategy as well, right, and how he handled the smear campaigns. A lot of media management went on. There was a lot of press releasing. We've seen that on SAA as well. You can get 5-6 press releases, in a single week as the media sort of campaign and messaging is handled. And I think that's we've seen the released information through court cases as well. The Oak Bay court case you mentioned in the book, where he tried to explain in public in legal terms about why he couldn't intervene in the matter. How do you think he actually manages these things? Do you think he maps out strategies and scenarios and things like that? Because you go into the book in quite a bit of detail about how he gets everyone to write everything down, how he gets people to sort of map what they're up to day to day. How do you think he actually works day to day in terms of the strategy of how he sort of manages these sorts of things, particularly in relation to the smear campaigns?
Well, one of his confidants told us that he, when he's confronted with an issue, he has meetings and brings in trusted people, and they discuss the whole thing, and then a very thorough note-taking process takes place. And the next stage of the meeting, he goes back to the notes and they flesh that out. So it's incredibly thorough. But then they do play acting, where, for example, he has to go and present to a cabinet, something to cabinet, and various people will play acts being the president or being another member of cabinet, or a press conference where someone might ask aggressive questions. So he is very, very thorough in preparation for issues like that. And for all those controversies, I'm sure he dealt with them in exactly the same way.
No, I think that side of it is actually very interesting from investors I know who have read the book already. We see the product of a lot of that, right? But knowing the input, I think one guesses it's there, but seeing it laid out is certainly very interesting. But we've mentioned a few times a sort of issue of trust, and related to that is obviously the issue of betrayal, particularly as may have been felt or not by Pravin on what Jacob Zuma got up to. And in the book, you quote Derek Hanekom saying it wasn't really a sense of betrayal necessarily, just a sort of sense of having to get on and deal with the situation. And this has come up a lot around the factionalism in the ANC at the moment. Is there the lack of sense of betrayal maybe a problem? Maybe there should have been more of a sense of betrayal, more anger. Maybe he and others would have acted earlier or more forcefully against state capture.
Sure. I mean, I think that I was surprised because Pravin also, we asked him about whether he felt betrayed, and he also said no, it's not betrayal. It's disappointment, it's hurt, but it's not a betrayal. And I was surprised at that response. And I think maybe if they had seen what was happening earlier, they could have stopped a lot of it. But interestingly enough, when we interviewed his wife, Pravin's wife, she did see it as a betrayal. And she was an activist herself. They'd met in the 70s in Natal, as activists. And she spoke quite, I think, in quite a profound way about that feeling of betrayal, of the she said something about, these were your comrades and you could put your life in their hands and you could trust them with that. And here they were just looting the country. And I was really struck by that. But I equally as I was struck by the fact that Pravin and Derek Hanekom didn't see it as a betrayal, because it certainly seemed to be a betrayal.
So, I mean, if we take that a step further, maybe to interrogate this fact a little further, if we think about his second period in the Ministry of Finance, and this I think is an unanswered question we're all watching for, particularly from the Zondo Commission as well, is should Treasury practically, politically, not have done more to stop state capture? There's still a lot of open questions about, for instance, how oversight mechanisms worked on ESCOM coal contracts, in particular, what was known when. Did you get any sense that more could have been done earlier, and maybe this sort of question of betrayal or not feeds into that somewhat?
Yeah, I think so. I think the one aspect of South African politics that people don't understand broadly is the ANC tradition is very much inward looking, and there's because they're, I guess, still relatively close to being at time as a liberation party, and a lot of these people grew up in that time. There's a kind of loyalty that I think prevents people from speaking out. And yes, I do think that people could have spoken out earlier. There must have been other people in the heart of the government and the ANC who knew what was going on. So yes, that is unfortunate. I'm not sure about Treasury itself. The people in Treasury, I think, generally were quite committed to clean governance, but I wouldn't be able to give an answer as to when they knew or didn't know.
I mean, of course, he's very involved now in the cleanup that's going on through the DPE. That's a highly complex process. We've seen, ESCOM reclaiming money. We've seen prosecutions starting to be launched. I mean, in the sense of the cleanup that he's now pushing through, what do you think the real legacy will be on that front?
Well, I think that one, we'll have to wait and see. But I do think that the approach that he's taken is typical of him, is a very thorough, very diligent. And I think you'll see maybe in 10, 15 years, we'll look back on this time and say, well, he did a good job on the state-owned enterprises. I do think that ultimately we're going to have far fewer state-owned enterprises. They will be more, they will be supported in a far more strategic way. There'll be less of a drain on the country, and that's his objective. And he's not the kind of guy who fails. I hope certainly in a couple of years' time we'll look back and say.
Peter, there's some pressure from the attendees for Q&A.
Indeed, people can tap questions in the chat. Please do. Coming to that in a second. The Q&A function at the bottom. Please do tap away. We'll ask those shortly. But I just wanted to follow on this issue of sort of legacy. You touch on this in the book a little bit about retirement. It's an area I think that South Africans in general, seeing him undertake the cleanup, investors as well looking for changes in SOEs. Maybe he hopes he goes on forever. There is a lot of pressure to move, for instance, ESCOM under the Department of Energy, which could be quite heavily problematic. It seems worrying maybe that he hasn't necessarily got a successor that he's groomed to go into, say, DPE, or the party more broadly hasn't necessarily got cadres coming up of a similar sort of set in terms of strategy, attention to detail, etc. necessarily. It's always very hard to find these sorts of people who might be an ex-finance minister, an ex-DPE minister. How do you think about the retirement question? And I suppose the question I'm trying to ask is who is the next Pravin Gordhan?
Oh. I have no idea who the next Pravin Gordhan is. I do know that he's thought about retiring a lot, he said that at every point something came up that made it impossible for him to retire. It was either an election or he was just sort of called in to become the finance minister again. But I think that the toll of those Zuma years were heavy, and I think they took a physical toll on him as well. And I think his family, even though they're very, very supportive, I get the impression that they believe that it's time for him to step down. He's in his early 70s. he's been an activist, since his early 20s. So it's, half a century of activism. I don't think he'll retire as an activist, but I think we might see him retire soon as from the cabinet and from sort of active politics. And Chris, any ideas who the next Pravin is?
No, but you do touch on a very, very important issue that during the Zuma years, the government, throughout the government, was stripped of talent. And a lot of people left, a lot of them are sitting in the private sector. A lot of people who would perhaps have been able to step up aren't there anymore. So it is a very serious question. I mean, Cyril Ramaphosa's got his hands full at the moment, winning the battle within the ANC. And hopefully he does. But once that does happen, and should it happen, then I think he's going to have to turn his attention to exactly that.
Exactly. So I think it's a very interesting question to ponder. That, in a sense, Pravin Gordhan has been too successful, and that creates problems in terms of succession. But in terms of questions, we have a few coming in that I'll wrap in now. The first question, which is partly related to this issue of legacy and succession, I suppose, is around ego. Some people maybe think that the attention to detail, the very strong views that come out of that from him is ego. Do you think there's ego behind that? Do you need to have a certain amount of ego in reality to be a minister, to last this long in this kind of environment?
It's a very interesting question, because before we started researching the book, we heard people said that to us. You're going to find this guy's got quite an ego. And in our interactions with him, we spoke to him for about 8 hours. We found the exact opposite. There were lots of things that people attributed to him, lots of moments in history where he played a big role, but he never once claimed this things for himself. So we didn't find him to have an ego in that sense. But I do think he's a tough guy. He's very direct. He's not afraid to tell you that you're a fool. And so, he rubs a lot of people up the wrong way. I think I can see he's very confident, sits comfortably in himself. So I do think that he would, that people might see that in his persona, but he certainly didn't appear like that when we talked to him.
An interesting point. If you're on top of the detail, maybe it comes across like that. But as you say, he can jump on people if they have the slightest fact wrong. I've been in that situation before. In meetings, one does a ginormous amount of homework going into such meetings. I think you reflected that as well in the book, that you have to do a huge amount of research before going into those sorts of meetings with them. Someone's asking what Pravin's take is on the book, and if he's read it yet.
Well, we don't know. We've sent him a copy, but we haven't had a response. So it's been out for a couple of weeks. And we're pretty sure he's read it, but he hasn't responded. So yeah, we don't know.
Okay.
His daughter came to a webinar that we were interviewed on, and she was warm about it. So we took some consolation from that.
Someone's been asking on the smear campaigns and these sorts of things, why the EFF is so aggressive against him. What does he know that makes them nervous? And I suppose the related question to that, which has always perplexed me, is the pushback, whether it's from EFF or IOL, these sorts of people. It is remarkably flimsy, actually. If he does indeed have stuff against them, maybe one would assume they would try harder. But it, as you say, reflects on the fact they didn't speak to you. But why do you think they're quite so aggressive?
I think with the EFF, you can plot the trajectory of their attitude towards Pravin, and they were very supportive when he was taking on Zuma, and he was kind of he was being heralded as the future of the country. But the moment that the EFF got embroiled in the VBS bank scandal, and which came to, over time, came to indicate that they were quite corrupt themselves, That's when they turned, the moment that started, because he was the anti-corruption guy. So, and yes, you're right. I mean, a lot of the stuff that's directed at him is very, very flimsy. But sadly, journalists in South Africa have bought quite a bit of it. So he's had to put up with a lot of absolute rubbish, I'm afraid.
Now, I think, as I said earlier, on like the rogue unit issue, right? If you ask the average person, they would probably think, yes, there was a rogue unit. Was it that bad, etc.? You know, the narratives on these things have still become very confused, and you know, maybe some of the output of the Zondo Commission can start to correct that on some points. In terms of succession as well, there's an interesting question about finance ministers. Actually, we're always hunting, and after Tito left, this was a question as well on finance ministers. Who was meant to be being groomed, and the question was Pravin not grooming Nhlanhla Nene to be next finance minister. Of course, he did become finance minister. He then, as a man of honor, fell on his sword and had to leave because of various scandals around his son, I think it was. But how do you think other people who followed him at finance, like Nene, fit into the picture? And Mcebisi Jonas, of course, as well. You go into a bit in the book.
Nene obviously replaced Gordhan when he was demoted, and Nene became finance minister. And I think, by all accounts, he was doing an incredible job. I think it's difficult because he didn't have much time in the post at that point. But I think also there's an interesting sort of question about why Zuma appointed him. And perhaps it was because he also thought he might be pliable, but he found out that he was made of sterner stuff. And I think also with Mcebisi Jonas, he himself was another hero of the state capture, the resistance against state capture. So I think on from that aspect, they proved to be people of integrity.
I think Mcebisi Jonas would have been the next finance minister if he hadn't fallen foul of Zuma.
Indeed, he's now gone off into the private sector. I mean, to finish up, maybe on looking to the future, what do you think Pravin's wider role in the party is at the moment in terms of crafting a new generation of leadership, these sorts of things? We've seen Pravin Gordhan, of course, go in and do a lot of this after he's left office and has taken up this mantle. In particular, do you see Pravin getting involved in that side of things, or where do you think he goes next in those terms?
I think he'd like to. And he'd be quite happy to, and he'd want to pass on what he's learned. But the ANC is so embroiled in the moment in an internal fight between what we might characterize as the good guys and the bad guys, the corrupt and the anti-corruption guys, that I don't think anyone's focusing on that as they should be. So unfortunately, until that issue is resolved, I don't think you're going to see much of the coaching and training happening.
And maybe some takeaways just to finish off on the book. You've said a few times you were surprised by things. You don't think people knew certain things about him. What were each of your brief takeaways that people probably don't know about Pravin?
Well, I think it's his early years, his involvement in the struggle, and I think it's not only him, but it's that group of activists from the 1970s in Natal, and how instrumental they were in pioneering this concept of mass mobilization. I found that an absolutely intriguing part of South Africa's history that I think very few people know about. And a lot of them are unsung kind of heroes who've just gone on with their lives. And I think also, how he was tortured. Pravin was tortured by the security police. He was detained. He was absolutely adamant that he had dedicated his life to the overthrow of apartheid. And I think that's also not really recognized. And then just finally, how he's been involved at all these crucial moments in South Africa's history, from the mass mobilization, he played a big role in the formation of the UDF. In the negotiation phase, he helped shepherd South Africa through that. Local government, SARS, all of these very, very critical points, and then state capture, now cleaning up the rot in the SOEs.
Yeah, well, obviously, Jonathan and I obviously work very closely on the books. My answer would be almost identical. But I think the one thing, if I could characterize his entire career, that surprised me is the commitment, and it's a commitment to South Africa and to the people of South Africa, and it's been, I think, absolutely astonishing. It really is. It is remarkable.
Well, I would definitely echo that. I think when you read the book, it's a history of South Africa in many senses, and the journey and the history of one person in parallel to that. So that's why certainly I enjoyed reading it a lot, and learning many of these things afresh from that perspective. But thank you very much. Back to you, Sharon.
Thank you very much. I found that enlightening because I haven't read the book yet. I have it and it's ready to be read. But the key points that I picked up from listening to the four of you was the higher purpose of the man, what he stood for, what he believed in, and that was the country first. And the part I had to smile at is taking on SARS as an activist. Yeah, he took it on, we all saw it as being so seriously anti-corruption. And that is probably what we will always know him for. Being organized, and the part that you talked about as well, you took the words out of my mouth at one stage, which was a man who's prepared to get into the detail, but equally can be extremely strong strategic thinker. And as you said, there are not many people who have that capability. The degree of preparedness was a really interesting insight, because I see that sometimes in the FTSE 100 companies preparing for roadshows. And it's interesting to see someone there has got enough of the business side to know that being prepared means you can appear arrogant because you actually know what you're doing, you know where you're standing from. And I think his being trusted, being smart, being prepared, and the number of times he's intervened for the benefit of the country has come across in your discussions and your sharings. And I think as we say, there's a number of politicians in South Africa's history we can be so grateful for. And he very much is one of them. So thank you for your work. I appreciate it. And thanks to everyone who joined us and for the questions. And I see a couple of orders have just been placed, so you guys are making some bucks. And thank you very much. It was actually interesting that his foes are the ones that didn't want to talk, because that was one of the questions that came up after Peter had addressed that point, is that you didn't always get the depth of against because it wasn't that strong. Interesting observation on your side. So thanks to everybody. I appreciate you being with us. We have a number of events coming up, particularly in the ESG space, with COP26 coming ahead of us. So please watch our website and we will send you invitations. So appreciate everyone for joining us today. Thank you and good afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.